Only mode.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us for tonight's Inspiration webinar. Inspiration Software is the embroidery software line of G7 Solutions and designs and machine embroidery. Our Inspiration Software line includes My Block Piecer, My Quilt Embellisher, Perfect Embroidery Pro, Perfect Stitch Viewer, Word Art and Stitches, and My Quilt Planner. Tonight's webinar is Text, Borders, and Flourishes. Oh my! We have a wonderful team assisting us tonight. Inspiration Team Support, Nancy R., Chris L., Catherine A., and Dory N. And I would like to present you to our Inspiration Consultant, the Oz of Quilting, Tamara Evans.
Thank you, Dory. Welcome, everybody, tonight, and thank you for joining us so close to Christmas when we know you have lots of stuff to do, but this will be fun, and we're going to talk about text and borders and flourishes. The first thing that comes to mind when we do that, I think, from a quilting standpoint, is quilt labels. So we're going to go through a few photographs here of different labels and text and talk about some things that we need to pay attention to. In this first one, this first photograph, there are 3 items here, and what I want to tell you in this part is to type your text in Word. First, take advantage of spell check. It is very important, whether you're just doing a couple of words like this or you're doing a whole message. Run spell check so you don't end up stitching something like this, Baker's Beaties, instead of Baker's Beauties, and running a label and having to do it over again. Then the next one I want to show you is a simple quilt label that says Happy 16th birthday, and what you want to remember with this is to write who, why, where, when. This is evidently Donna's 16th birthday, and it's July 28th, 2014. It was made with love by her aunt. And where was Boston, Massachusetts? And adding washing instructions to a quilt label is a fabulous idea. In fact, if you're doing a quilt label, and I would add one just for the washing instructions, whether it's to the label for the person receiving it with the message, or you do it separately, you always want to let them know how to clean the quilt. For example, wash on gentle cycle, cold water, line dry, hand wash, mild detergent, no bleach, low heat, tumble dry, or vacuum the front, especially if you're adding stuff like beads and specialty threads, all of that. Do not wash, keep out of direct sunlight. I mean, this would be a great message for an heirloom quilt. If you're doing a baby quilt, you know, let them know how to get the stains out of it, and possibly wash it with polyester thread. So if they need to use some extra strong detergent, they can do that. Also, another idea is to combine different fonts. This particular label is a combination of a border that is built into my Quilt Embellisher, and the last name up at the top is a serif font, and the rest of it is a cursive font. So combine different fonts in it to make different things stand out. I like the cursive font because you don't have to trim between the letters, and of course in this one you can adjust the colors any way you want to with both the border and with your text. Another idea is to use an extra quilt block from the quilt if you have one, or make one in my block piecer. You can easily change the size of a quilt block. For instance, this one isn't exceptionally or particularly square. It looks a little bit oblong, and you could do that to make a quilt label that is actually a quilt block and add it to the back of the quilt. You always want to put on something with the quilts that tells who made it and what the occasion was, and of course, if you want to include washing instructions, that's great. But that keeps people on down the line, you know, historically, from wondering, well, I wonder what this quilt was made for and why. Now you know. And that's very popular in quilt networks, and when you're talking about quilting, to label what you've done. Always do that. It's important to, when they save it and they pull it out of a box, you know, 50 years later, and they go, oh, this was the quilt that Aunt Kathleen made for Donna, blah, 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 on her 16th birthday. So a couple of other suggestions. Use a plain fabric for the base of the quilt so the writing is legible. If you do it on a print fabric, it's kind of difficult. It could be difficult to see. So use more of a plain fabric or a tone-on-tone with contrasting thread. Stitch the small lettering with a sharp needle, like a 65 or 70, with lightweight thread. I love to use a 60 weight thread when I'm stitching smaller lettering. You need to combine that with a smaller needle, even a size 60 or size 8 needle. The largest I would use would be a 70. And also remember with that, do not use your automatic threading function on your machine, if you have one, because it will not like that small of an eye in the needle. So thread it yourself. And I often take, when I'm doing that, take the needle out, thread it, and then put the needle back into the machine before I start stitching. You can add fusible webbing to the wrong side of the label and fuse it down before you start quilting. If you're using an extra quilt block, you can place a layer of interfacing over the block with the glue side to the front side of the quilt block. Then sew around the block with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, split the interfacing, trim the corners, and turn it right side out. Then you can fuse that block with your message on it to the back of the quilt, because you don't want to stitch it down and go through to the front side of the quilt. You can also do a label like this, fuse it down, and then quilt it. That will hold your label in place once the quilt is finished. So you don't have to worry about going back and hand stitching it or anything else. You just fuse it down, quilt your quilt, and the label stays in place, which is very simple to do. And then finally, if the label is an applique, use a thread that matches the quilt backing or the binding for a cohesive look. If you're going to quilt that on there first on your backing, then do it, you know, where it looks pretty with the rest of the quilt. So those are just a few pictures so you can visualize what we would do with a quilt block. And now let's get out of this PowerPoint, and we don't want to save, just go. Now I want to open up my Quilt Embellisher right here. Hang on one second. And here is my, hang on, my Quilt Embellisher, not my quilt planner. Actually, we will come back to my quilt planner very soon. Thank you all for the ones who came in and watched it, and we got bumped out by GoToWebinar. So that will be repeated very shortly. Stay tuned for more details. Here is my Quilt Embellisher. And for those of you who aren't aware, my Quilt Embellisher has a lot of fonts built in, actually 50 different fonts. You can find them by clicking right here in the center of your tool bar, the second row, for your text tools. So if you click on text and then click on the screen, it will display a letter A. Then moving over here to your properties, and these are your text properties, you see the font, and it tells you it's formal, monogram, the height, the space, the line spacing, and so on. You can type right here in your text box whatever you want to type. If you want to look at all of the fonts available, then click on the picture of the font, and it will bring up a picture of all 50 fonts, starting with Arial, and if we scroll down, that goes all the way down to Yankee. Now, when you're looking at these, if they only have capital letters, then only capital letters are available with that font. So if you type in lowercase and they don't show up, that's why. If you want to type uppercase and lowercase, make sure you select a font that has both of those. Some of these were selected specifically because they look great as a monogram, and other ones because they look great to do text in. If you want to do very, very small text, this is a run stitch font, Arial Central Run. It works great, and you can get down to about, well, I'll tell you what, let's go see how small we can get with that. If I go up here to the top row of selections and click on Help, whoop, let's close that a minute. I'm going to go click on Help and click on Contents to go to my built-in manual and click on my Quilt Embellisher, and let's go to Text Embellishment, and I'll click the plus sign to the right of that, and then go to Font Library. It will show me all the fonts available, all the characters available for that font, or uppercase and lowercase, not all the characters, but it'll show me what they look like. But right here on this part, it tells me every character that is available for that font and the recommended height range. So with my Arial font, I can get down to 0.2 inches, which is incredibly small. Arial 4 millimeter, I can get down to 0.16, which I have a feeling is actually 4 millimeters. Arial Central Run, which is the run stitch font. I don't have as many special characters, but I've got uppercase, lowercase numbers, and some of the special characters. And as we scroll through, we can see, for example, in August, this is a two-color font, and it has just uppercase and lowercase, and it recommends that your font size is 0.79 inches. Some of them are much larger if you want to use them for a monogram, but this is a good way to kind of learn a little bit more about the fonts that are available. If you need an umlaut or a tilde, then brush 6 millimeter might be a good font for you to use. And scrolling through just to see what's available and what all of the letters look like. And you can click on that. You don't have to go find a printed manual. Just click on it to look, and you're ready to go. So these are all the different fonts available. Kids is one that's really fun. And we'll just scroll all the way through because you do have 50 digitized scalable fonts. These are like commercial fonts built into the software, which is amazing for quilting software. So let's take a look more at the font functions. I will tell you, if you want to learn a lot about fonts, if you don't have Perfect Embroidery Pro, go look at the webinar that Catherine Martinez has done on the fonts. It's absolutely amazing. And you will get into a lot more depth than what we're able to do tonight. But she just has explained it so well, and with all the options that are available, because you have a lot of those built into my Quilt Embellisher. One of them that I think is really special is that we have this text box over here. Now, in Quilt Embellisher, I can't actually type on screen, and that's fine. I don't have to because I have a text box. I can copy and paste text into this. And when we talked earlier about running spell check in the first slide when we started this presentation, we want to run spell check. We don't have that built into our text function, so the best place to do that would be in Word. Let me pull up a Word document right here. I have written down a little poem that actually was on something my mother cross-stitched for me, and when I wrote it in Word, I noticed I have a misspelling right here. So let's run spell check. We'll do F7, and it says that is not right. If I come over here to the right-hand side, I can select the word I want and change it. And now all of my spelling and grammar is complete. I can simply copy this by highlighting it, okay? So I'm going to highlight it and then right-click, well, highlight it, right-click, and I want to do copy. And then let's go back to my Quilt Embellisher. Click here in my text box. I'm going to do a backspace to get rid of that A. Right-click and paste. Now, let's apply that. But let's select a font that has upper and lower case. That's not really a monogram. I like cursive, actually, myself. So let's click cursive and apply. And in a moment, it will show up on the screen. And there you go. And we are in text mode. Let me turn off my commands for a minute. And you can see here is all of the text that we just brought in from Word. Okay, copied and pasted it. You can also do this if you find something on the internet that you want to copy and paste, or even from an email, whatever. What you can copy, select the text, copy it, then come in and paste it into your text box. Is everybody with me, Dory?
Yes, and I would be with you if I could take my mute off.
Okay. So I just didn't want to lose anybody before I keep going. Are we all together?
Yeah, we are, and we've got pretty cools coming in. So you're on a good roll.
Okay, good. Then I'll keep going. Now, as I look at this and zoom in, I've got some spaces in between these letters. Okay, there's a very easy way to fix that. Those are mathematically centered, but for our purposes, we want them to connect. It's cursive. They should all connect. So, easy way to change that. I'm going to select my text, and you notice behind my cursor there's an A. That means I'm in text mode. Let me show you the difference. If I come over here to the right and go to my select tool and click on it, I'm not in text mode. I need to be in text mode to do that. So to get back in text mode, I simply come up here to my tools, my icons, excuse me, and select text. Then when I click on it, you'll see all of this extra stuff. Let's zoom in real quick. And you see these blue dots? That's my kerning. I can separate things and move them back together. But I'm not going to get that detailed today. And that's a great lesson that Catherine has done in Perfect Embroidery Pro. So we will let you go watch that. I'm going to undo, or Control Z, which is the same thing as undo, my favorite command. And here's the black diamond that will let you select just one letter and do something with it. But I want to affect the whole message right here. So I come to my properties box over here on the right-hand side, and my space percentage is at 0. If I click on that, and if I'm at 0, if I wanted them spaced further apart, I would make it a positive number. If I want them closer together, I'm going to select a negative number. So I will do minus, I don't know, let's try 2 and see what that works out as. So my space percentage minus 2%, it's not very big, and then click Apply. And we'll see how that moves those letters closer together. I actually think that might be the ticket. Actually, maybe I can go minus 3. There's a couple of them that aren't quite as close together as I would like, so I'll change my space percentage to a minus 3 and click Apply again, because I don't want there to be jump stitches between them if I can help it. And there we go. You know, I think that looks pretty good. We can always select to put it on 3D. And I think that looks just fine. So now, when I go to stitch this out, one thing, and let's take it off 3D so you can see here. One thing that's happening is I have jump stitches between each of the words and a couple of the letters, but I also have a jump stitch at the end of each line that comes back here and goes. I want to make that a trim. So I'm going to select my text again, and I'm still in text mode, but I could also do this in my regular selection mode. But I'm going to come over to my properties box over here and select commands. Okay, commands tells my embroidery machine how to deal with this. And if you come down to the bottom under text commands, you have color change and trim. Now, right now, my trim is set for characters. And that means it's trim in between each and every one of those letters. This is going to take a very, very long time to stitch out. And it will have a lot of knots on the back of it because it has trimmed between each and every one of those characters, when actually most of them flow together very nicely. So let's look at how we can change that. I'm going to change that to trim between words and click Apply and see what happens, if we can see anything. And we really don't see any difference except that there's not going to be a knot. Well, you can kind of see right here. If I go to 3D, there's a jump stitch between the T and the H. These are evidently close enough. They didn't think it was a different word. There's a jump stitch there. That's a little better, but that's still going to take a long time to stitch out. So here is my preference for this. I'm going to change my trim to lines. I want it to trim at the end of each line, because if I look at this out of 3D, you see the dotted line here is it was trimmed right here. I don't want a jump stitch going all the way from the end of this line of my poem to the beginning of this and getting caught in the letters coming up. I can go back and trim between the words very easily, okay, with some little snips while I'm watching TV, and this will stitch out nice. And if I only trim on the front, and then when you turn it over, just pull those stitches in between, like right here and right here. If you just take a seam ripper, but don't actually trim them, just pop them. It'll pop whatever you cut off to the back, and there won't be any gaps between them, and you won't have this long stitch coming back over and getting caught in your words. So makes it very easy, very efficient, and the back of it doesn't look really horrible, and it doesn't take a long time to stitch out. Now, if your machine, perchance, does not have a trimmer, then a trim function, you know, it doesn't cut the thread, then here's what you would do. Instead of doing a trim at the end of each line, change it to a color change at the end of each line and apply. You don't have to change your thread color, but it will stop and let you trim this jump stitch that's going to go back so you don't get that caught in there. Okay, that's I have a machine that doesn't trim, and that's the way I handle it on there. Now, I don't change my thread. I leave it the same thread color, but when it stops, I'll trim the top. I don't really care about the back because it's going to be against my quilt anyway, so I can leave it that way. Okay, now let's take off that color change and apply again. And now let's change this poem. I'm going to go to use my select tool, and I want to put something around this that looks nice. I have built into this software, or we have built into the software, 100 different border designs. These border designs are great for a quilt label. They're also good for a lot of other things, but you could select any one of these that you like. So let's pick, this is kind of wide and not so high, but we may want to add something to it later. How about this one? I like this border. I'm going to pick that. Now this one is taller than it is wide, so I'm simply going to come up top here and select to rotate it to the right 90 degrees. I click it twice. I'm going to put it here in the middle, and then I can stretch it because these are very scalable. I'm in my select tool now, and I'm just clicking on the notes on the sides and top and bottom to stretch this out. I'm going to make it a little bit longer. And let's see. Oh my goodness, this is never going to work because this is like 20 inches wide. So let's shrink it down a little bit. First, let's select our text. Now, because this is digitized, scalable fonts, I can shrink it by using my text tool. By using my select tool. So I can shrink it down that way just by dragging that in. I can shrink it in this way. And I do want to point out something to you at this point. If I scroll into, look at this, okay? I want you to see, especially in 3D format, that my E's still have space between them. If they didn't, then I would have a real problem when I go to stitch this out, because if that was all, if there was no space and all of that was hitting together, I would get those ka-chunk stitches. It wouldn't have, if I'm not using a scalable font, that would happen here. Because these are digitized scalable fonts, I've got that flexibility to move them and resize them. Then I'm going to take my border here and do the same thing. And just squish that in this way so it fits. To line them up, I can drag a box around both of them, come up to the top and click my alignment tools, both vertical and horizontal, and it puts my message right there in the center. Now, let's do center origin by right-clicking on the ruler, center origin. I can see that this one also, by coming up to the top, it's a little over 10 inches, almost 11 by 6. That's not too bad. And I'm going to break right there and see if there's any questions on what we've done so far.
Yes, we do have a couple questions. Good. Number one,
okay.
That border there, what number is that? Melinda wants to know.
Well, Melinda, I don't know. I think it was down at the very bottom. Border number 95, right here.
Thank you.
And these, you can change the color on any of these as well. They're very scalable. They're just great borders. Okay, oops, undo that. Control Z. Yes, now? What was the other question?
Yes. And what about the MS and the VS? They look very close together to me. Okay, where's the MS and the VS? Love. Okay, with love. Second line.
Oh, sure. And you can go in. Here's the thing. Once you have it done, I just selected it with the select tool right here, but I could also select it with the text tool right here. Now, when it's selected with the text tool, let's zoom in right there on the OV, and here's my kerning tool, this little blue double triangle. If I click on that, I can separate those letters a little bit more, and it's a good idea to go back and look because we did a global change of the spacing between the letters. That doesn't necessarily work for every single letter. So by simply moving that, it will move every letter to the left of that of the letter you select so that they all stay where they were, but you could separate between like the O and the V right here and make that a little bit more readable.
Aha.
Does that answer the question?
It does. It does. That answered mine too. We here's another question from our little friend Nancy. She wants to know, would you use a water-soluble stabilizer on top when stitching to raise the jump stitches for easy trimming?
Oh, great idea. Great idea, Nancy. Whenever I do satin stitching, whether it's words, whether it's an applique or whatever, I find that it looks so much better if I use a water-soluble stabilizer because on top, or topper. On top. You can use whatever you want to on the bottom based on what you're trying to do. I always use a water-soluble topper because it keeps those stitches, and especially these smaller ones, from, because every time that needle drops, you're making a knot, and it's pulling that thread down underneath your fabric, making a knot, and it compresses it. If you have a stabilizer or a topper on top of that, and I would use water soluble because you can just wet this easily and get rid of it, it's kind of a loft enhancer. It keeps more thread on top of the fabric, and you will find that your stitches are so much smoother and it looks so much better. It's worth every cent, and water soluble topping is not expensive, but it makes everything look so much better when you're doing satin stitching of any kind. It just looks so much more finished and polished if you do that. And I challenge you to try that. I learned my lesson a long time ago with doing some appliques, that the satin stitch were just amazing, and especially in this situation. Yes, plus it will make it easier to trim these jump stitches between it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And our friend Linda wants to know, do you have the shape feature to add nodes, to add a few stitches if you needed to? Go up on the left.
To the text? To the text?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I believe she's curious about that left button.
Yeah, the shape feature in this works on, it doesn't work on the text, but it does work on, as you can see here, the other, the background design on satin stitches. We're kind of a little limited. She's an advanced user on what we can do with the shape function with the text. Unless, hang on one second. Good question. I like challenges. If I select my text and now I'd have to be able to break it apart to do that, and that is not an option in this program.
No, and also all these letters are all digitized for us. So
right.
that is going to impact it.
Type text. Right, exactly.
Okay.
Very good question, though.
Yes.
Way to think out there. Okay, so I could move this and you know, up to the top, and then, you know, put a message down here. But the thing I love about the text is that it is digitized, scalable keyboard fonts, and that when I make it very small, it keeps, this is your test right here, the E's. And if you had the A's that have the hook over the top of them, not this A, but the ones that have the little hook over the top, that's your test. Always go in and look at those and make sure that there is space inside the hole, and that will tell you that your font is, you've got a very good chance of your font stitching out just beautifully. Okay, so let's take a look again at our, I'm going to open up a new file here. And let's take another look at our borders. We have 100 borders built in here, and they are, some of them are multicolored, some of them are not, but of course you can change the color on any of them. Here is one that has two colors built in, and when I bring it in, it brings it in at almost 6 by 4 1/4, which is a nice size, but they're all satin stitches and run stitches, so you can sew these very nicely and rotate them. And I like to look at it in 3D and see what I'm dealing with. You can even select, because this was brought in from kind of a library, it comes in grouped. If I want to change one color on this, then I will ungroup it. If I want to change just the gold, I can go in by object and do different things, but I can select it by color over in my sequence view. So let's collapse this so we're not looking at all of the stitches. I can select just the gold color and change that to blue if I want to. I could also select it and change my stitch length. This is a very short stitch length. If I want to make it, instead of 1.8, I could make it 2.3 millimeters long, and apply it. So I have a little bit longer stitch. The longer the stitch, the more thread you have above the fabric, so you see it a little bit better, and it stitches quicker. If I want to change the satin stitch, I can change the width of it right here. If I want to make that wider than in my properties box, if I want to make that wider than 1.2, I could make that 2.0 and apply that and make it a little bit bigger. So you have a lot of editing features and customization that you can do with the flourishes that are built into the software. Okay? All right. Do we have any other questions before I move on?
Nope. Is that a single or a bean stitch?
This one is actually a single run stitch, and if evidently it's a combination. So if I want to really analyze that, I will come over here to my sequence view on the bottom left-hand side, and let's see if these aren't all, well, they actually are all run. So I could select that, and I could make that a bean stitch if I wanted to, and apply it if we really want that to stand out, and make it stronger, or change the stitch length on it. Now, how we saw that reflected when I changed it here, if you go into your tools, go to General Options, and this may not have been something you played with before on the software, but if you go to View in your General Options right here and select, which I have checked, to increase double and bean run thickness in 3D view, it will show a little bit bolder. It's not a perfect thing, but yet it will make it bolder so you can see, kind of get a better preview idea. So I always have that checked. So if I do a two-ply or a bean stitch, I will see that it looks more prominent than if I just do a single run stitch. If I wanted to make that, let's see what happens if I change this run to being that's 9 repeats and apply. Then it makes it a little bit thicker. I mean, it's not an actual one, but here's something cool about my Quilt Embellisher and PEP. When you change a run stitch to a bean stitch, and you make it, 3, 5, 7, 9, whatever repetitions you want, even 5 or 7, what happens is every time the needle drops, I mean, it's going to go back and forth, forward, back, forward, back, forward, back, however many times you select, and it's going to drop that needle in the same hole. So if you want to get the look of DMC floss that has 6 strands, increase your stitch length to, 3 and make your bean stitch, 5 or 7, and apply that, and you will really have a pronounced stitch there, and it will look perfect, and it comes back in that hole every time, which is really cool. So it looks like you use several strands of thread when you only were using 40 weight embroidery thread or whatever thread you choose. Okay, so are we good on the embellishments or the borders now, Dory?
Yes, we are. Thank you. Nope, okay. We're good.
Okay, good. Okay, so while this is called my Quilt Embellisher, it's not just for quilting and doing quilt blocks. I have used the software to monogram things, napkins, and because it's just so easy and fun to do. And it's got great fonts in it. I've also used it for, I made a bathrobe, or monogrammed. I didn't make the bathrobe. I monogrammed the bathrobe for my daughter a couple of years ago for Christmas and used this. And let's open up a new file, and I want to go to my text, and I'm going to type in a couple of letters. Let's do DN for a good friend, and select a font. I always like to click on the fonts to select them, unless you know exactly which one you're looking for. And you can pull up lots, all 50 fonts. Select which one you want. Let's do, I'm going to do Kurt Screw. I think it's, I don't know, Kurt Script. Let's do that one, see what it looks like. Okay, now this is very small. It's only, if I look up here at the top, it's only 1.4 inches wide and 0.81 inches high. So I'm going to make it bigger. And I could drag my box out, not right now because I'm in text mode. So if I do that and drag my box out, it like this. If I wanted to put them in megaphone, that would look great, but I don't. So I'm going to click my undo twice. And I'll go to my select tool, and that way I can just resize it the way I want to. I can do it that way. I can also come over here and make it a specific size. In my properties box, transform that to a width of, let's make it exactly 3 inches by a height. If I uncheck maintain aspect ratio, I can change it. I want it 3 by 2 and click apply. Now I can even, if I go back to my text mode, okay, with it selected, so now I can select individual letters. I can offset this a little bit like that. And then I've got a really cool looking monogram. Okay, so let's look at it in 3D view and zoom in a little bit. Yeah, we'll center origin so it fills the screen and we look at it. Well, that looks nice, but I want it to be a little bit more interesting. So here's something fun you can do with lettering. Select your lettering, then come over to your properties box and select your column properties. This has to do with your satin stitching, okay? Now, you know what, before I do that, let's make this really big because I want to show you something that happens automatically. I'm going to make it really large. Maybe this is a jacket bag, even larger. I'm trying to get a certain effect here. Let's go to my properties box and look at my tools, general options, and I want to go to machine. Hang on, I'm looking for it. Well, actually, all right. Actually, okay, so it doesn't have that in this program. In PEP, it does, and in Word Art and Stitches, it does, that if you get so big on a satin stitch that it will convert it to a split satin, where it will, because if you get too big, you don't want great big satin stitches here. But even in my Quilt Embellisher, you can change that. So I'm going to select my satin stitch and go to my column stitch in the properties. Whoop. Hang on. Sorry, hit the wrong key. Let's go to column stitch and properties. And I want to split this satin. I want to make it random. And if my satin stitch goes over 7 millimeters, it will apply that. So I'm going to apply it. And now if we look at our satin stitch, you will see what it's done because that was all over 7 millimeters. And it's not a default in this program, but you can certainly change it. So I defaulted it to split that satin randomly so it still looks like a satin stitch, but I'm not going to get stitches, an individual stitch that's over 7 millimeters, which is really too big for a satin stitch. But I have other options I can do with this. If I select it again, let's go back to that in our text box to the column. And instead of doing random, let's do a percentage. And I want the split percentage to be at 50%. So I'm going to change that and click Apply. Now you get a totally different look, which is also cool. But you see here, it's splitting this right here randomly. So let's force it to split it exactly where we want it. I'm going to go back to my column stitch and say, deactivate the splitting if length is less than 2 millimeters, so that it will actually do it the way I want it to through the whole thing. And there you go. Another option with that is, let's play with a couple of things. I want to do it on both sides, and I want to split it instead of a percentage. I want to do it absolute 2 millimeters away from the outside edge on both sides. Let's see what that looks like. Then I get a totally different look. So you have so many capabilities in this software with fonts and borders and flourishes, which we have 50 different flourishes in here. We could select one to go with this design. And let's see, how about this one? It's a nice one. So if I just want to make a flourish over here, and maybe I want to make it at an angle, and we can adjust that. You can play to your heart's content. Come up with different ideas. So Dory, what questions do we have now?
To be honest, you've got them shell-shocked. They're sitting there because I want you to know I did not know that you could put this binding on the lettering. That is really good. Really good.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
I love that. But you know what? It's not just on the lettering. So let me take this flourish here. And let's go back over here to our column stitch in the properties box on the top right-hand corner. And we'll do the same thing on that. Let's do a split absolute both sides at 0.2. And I'm going to change this to 0.2 and click Apply. Well, it didn't do anything. And that's why you got to play with it. This could be, but anytime you have a satin stitch, if you go in there and do that, it will change your satin on it, which is just a great way to personalize lettering and make bigger letters than what you're allowed to, well, than what they recommend that you do with the software. So since it doesn't split it automatically in this program, I can manually tell it to split it, and I get a good outcome.
Are you allowed to do any editing of the flourishes? Can we
Oh, sure.
remove parts if we don't like the parts?
Actually, you can. Let's take a look at this one. There's lots of different things here, all right? And when you bring it comes in grouped. So that's your first trick. If you want to ungroup, then you can select specific parts because we can edit by object in the software. So let's select, and I'm just clicking and deleting. I want to delete that. I'll delete that. I want this little doodad gone. So if I want to make it look a little different, delete, 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 and now I've got just that part of it.
Oh, I like that. That's very handy.
Yeah. So you select by object. You can't actually go in and do a stitch edit in this software, but you can by object. So if you know how to use your sequence box over here and you expand, like with our monogram here, let's expand the view, and actually that's text, so there's not a whole lot you can do with it. Text is a little bit different, but with the embellishments and the frames, absolutely. You can do a lot of stuff with those.
Super. I learned a lot tonight.
Well, good. I had fun showing it.
Okay. And do we have any other further questions? Okay. And is there a recommended stabilizer for lettering?
You know, oh, that's a great question. I would well, you stabilize for the fabric that you're stitching on and the stitch count in your design. And I would recommend, well, this is a very large design. This has 21,000 stitches in it. It's 13 by 9. I don't have a hoop that I could put that in, frankly. But you would stabilize for the fabric. Like if I'm stitching this on a fleece bathrobe, then I'm going to put fusible poly mesh on the back of it and a water-soluble or a topper on the top and stitch it that way. You always use the stabilizer for the fabric that you're stitching it on and the stitch count of the design.
Super. Excellent. All right. I thank you very much, Tamara.
Well, thank you. And I want to tell everybody have happy holidays, Merry Christmas. Isn't this our last webinar before the new year?
It is. It is.
It is. It is. And we will be posting a Quilt Planner webinar sometime in the very near future because we got bombed out by GoToWebinar when we tried to do that. So sorry, guys, that didn't finish the way we had planned. But we will post it very soon so you can use your software. And happy holidays and Merry Christmas to everybody.
Thank you. Merry Christmas to you too. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Good night.